Hey, how are you guys today? I hope you're having a great Thanksgiving party day at school. Um, the first year we've had a Thanksgiving party day at school, and glad you guys were able to do that. Sorry I couldn't be there with you to celebrate with you. I hope you have a good day. I hope you have a good time this morning playing games together and just all the things that you're going to do together. So I hope you have a great day. Tomorrow is officially Thanksgiving, right? Our Thanksgiving holiday. So I've got a Thanksgiving joke for you guys. All right, going for a good joke. What did the turkey say to the hunter right before Thanksgiving Day? Anybody know? What did the turkey say to the hunter right before Thanksgiving Day? Quack, quack. I hope you guys have a good day today. Sorry again that I couldn't be with you this week. Looking forward, I'm looking forward to coming back and being with you guys again. You know, it's been a challenge, right? Dealing with COVID, people being sick, people having to stay home, a few people anyway. And I don't know, maybe some of you guys have had to go through some pretty difficult disappointments. I don't know if anybody had Thanksgiving plans disrupted by COVID, or maybe you're concerned about Christmas plans that could potentially get messed up by COVID. If that's the case, you know, that's hard and it's disappointing. And I'm sure even if at this point you're not having that, probably at some point you had some kind of disappointments that came about. Something got canceled or something because of COVID. And you know, it's difficult and it's hard. You know, and as we talk about Thanksgiving, this time of year can be understanding Thanksgiving and the holiday behind Thanksgiving can really help us to know how to think about those things. You know, what is Thanksgiving about? It's pretty self-explanatory, right? It's about being thankful for what we have. So the thing that I want you to think about this week is, what do I have? Despite the difficult circumstances, despite the hardships, what do I have that I can be thankful for? Because we do, you know, especially as Christians, we have things that we can always be thankful for, no matter what. So let's remember that this week. What are those things that we can thank God for? We need to be a people who live with gratitude and thanksgiving for what He's done for us. Okay? So I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking to you guys about the first Thanksgiving and helping us remember what it's all about. You know, why do we do this every year? Why do we have a holiday every November where we get together? Usually we eat turkey and get together with family. What's it all about? Where did it start? I wanted to spend some time, but before I do that, I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the importance of understanding history correctly. You know, we live in a world where there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of things being spread around that just aren't true. People wanting to push a certain kind of information that fits the things that they want to believe as opposed to what really is true, right? And so it's hard sometimes to know what can we believe and what can we not believe. And it's very important that we as Christians be people who are always searching for the truth, no matter what, no matter how hard it is. Even if the truth is something we don't want it to be, we want to search for, and do our best to find the truth. So one of those things, one of those stories that often gets tainted and twisted and changed by this modern narrative of always wanting to to make things out to be a certain way. One of those stories that gets changed is the story of Thanksgiving. There's sort of this modern push in our day to rewrite the story of Thanksgiving, to make it something that it's not, to use it to bolster a certain attitude and philosophy toward history, toward life, toward people from the past, that I think is unhealthy and unhelpful. And quite frankly, just often not true. And so we want to get to the truth, right? That's what we want. We want to know what really happened. History is so important, guys. It's so important to know what happened in the past. And my high school students, they should have some reasons for why we study history. They should know some of those reasons. Remember what those reasons are? Remember? So that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, right? That's kind of the common one that a lot of people talk about. It's also so that we don't become condescending toward people from the past, what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery. We don't want to become like that. And because we want to know who we are, why we do the things we do, what are the influences, the things that have shaped our culture over the centuries to bring us to the point of where we are today. What are those things, right? It helps us to understand why we do what we do, right? So there's a lot of reasons to study history, but it's important that we study history accurately. We want to know the truth. We want to know what really happened. And the first Thanksgiving is a classic example of one of those things where it's really important for us to understand the truth. So on one hand, you have people who are rewriting it, changing it, making it into something that it's not. And on the other hand, you have people who have kind of embellished it, over the years. We have this sort of thing in our minds of what we think Thanksgiving is or what it should be. And, some people have it's kind of become this cultural, this thing that has all these, what's the word I want? Traditions, all these traditions that come from it. And we have this idea of how it happened, and that shapes our traditions. And the traditions aren't bad, the traditions are good, but sometimes because of those things, we may believe something about it that isn't true either, right? So on both sides of the equation, there's often misinformation. And so it's important to really know what happened, right? It's important to try to get to the bottom. What is true? And here's the thing. The truth is often far more fascinating than the biased or twisted versions of the story. The truth is, in some ways, maybe more interesting than the versions of the story that have become, embellished over time. So let's talk some about it. Let's talk about the first Thanksgiving. How did it happen? Well, it started with a group of people, Puritans from England, who were no longer happy with the state of the church in England. They didn't like the direction it was going. They didn't like the things they believed, the things they required, and they felt like the Church of England had been corrupted beyond repair. So they separated themselves from that church. So they weren't actually called pilgrims. They were called separatists because they separated themselves from the Church of England. Now, they experienced a lot of persecution because of that. The Church of England was not happy with them leaving and doing their own thing. So they had to deal with a lot of pushback, a lot of persecution. So they left England, but initially they didn't go to America. They didn't go to the New World. Does anyone know where they went first? Okay. They went to the Netherlands, all right? And the reason they went there is because they knew they could have religious freedom in the Netherlands. They could serve God however they wanted. So they moved to the Netherlands and they started to establish their church and their little group there, but they never quite fit in. They never quite were at home in the Netherlands either. And for a variety of reasons. They had religious freedom, they could worship how they wanted, but it was more of a different culture, different society. They had to do things that they weren't comfortable doing. They weren't able to farm and things like that. They were an agrarian people. They loved to live off the land, and they couldn't do that as well in the Netherlands. And there wasn't as many opportunities for providing for your family. Economically, things were hard for them. Sometimes one of their group would find a better opportunity farther away, so they would move away from the group. So their group was kind of dwindling and getting smaller. And they were like, this isn't working. We don't want to live like this. We're gonna just kind of die away if it keeps going like this. So the opportunity arose to go to the New World. Now, what was the New World? Was it actually a new world? Of course not. It was a new continent, right? The continent of North America. And it was, it had been known about for a number of years, but there were still relatively few people who lived, at least from Europeans who lived in North America. So they felt like there was all this opportunity. We can go to North America and have our own land, our own place. Imagine if we found a new continent today and hardly anyone lived there. Would you want to go and start over and start a new life just kind of with you and your buddies and just have a good time? I don't know. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to go. They wanted to have the freedom to live how they wanted to live off the land, and just be who they wanted to be. So that's what they did. They secured passage on the Mayflower. There was 102 of them, and they sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and landed in North America. They didn't land at the place where they had planned to. I think it was a storm or something that took them off course. And they ended up at Plymouth, and that's where they settled. Now, it was very difficult, okay? The voyage over was very difficult, and a lot of people died. And then when they got there, they had to winter in the New World, and a lot of them ended up just staying on the ship for most of the winter. But finally, when it was all said and done, and they were able to get off the ship and start settling and start, building their little colony. Of the 102 passengers that had left Europe, exactly 51 survived. Now that's a very high mortality rate, right? You think about, right now we're dealing with COVID, and COVID is not a good thing. It's a serious thing, and there have been many people who have died from COVID. But can you imagine if we had some kind of a disease that wiped out half of our school, for instance? If within 2 weeks, half of your class all died, that would be really hard, really difficult. But that's what happened to the Pilgrims. Half of their number passed away in this voyage and to the New World, and part of it was also once they had already gotten there. There was just a lot of suffering, a lot of disease, a lot of things that they had to deal with. It was very, very difficult. So when they made it through to the next fall and they had a successful harvest, they decided to have a day, or maybe a few days, of celebrating and feasting and dedicating these days to just giving thanks to God for what he had done for them. Now imagine that. They had suffered tremendously. Half of them had died, and they were still spending time thanking God for what he had done for them. The Pilgrims weren't actually initially called the Pilgrims. I think I already mentioned that. They were called Separatists. They didn't get the name Pilgrim till years later. I think it was an author who was talking about them. And the reason he referred to them as pilgrims is because he talked about them as being people who understood that they were strangers and pilgrims in this world, right? They realized that they were living for something greater than this life. Now, they wanted the best thing in this life too, right? That's why they went to the new world. They were searching for freedom. They were searching for, a good life for their families. But they weren't limited by fear, because I'm sure they knew the risks, right? I'm sure they knew it was not, there's a high probability that there was going to be some death and suffering in crossing the Atlantic to this new world. But they were willing to take the risks. And part of the reason is because they weren't bound by fear, because they knew that they had something better, right? That even if they died in the process, they had something better to live for. They had eternity. And so they were people who understood that this world is not our home. And that's one of the reasons that they're referred to as the pilgrims, because that, like I said, that was not what they were initially called. So anyway, they get to the new world, and they have this day of feasting and Thanksgiving. It seems that there were some Indians at the first Thanksgiving. Some people disagree on this. Some people want to say that the Indians actually weren't there. But I think most historians would say that the Indians probably were there. Why were they there? Some would say that they were invited. Again, we're not exactly sure. Maybe they just stopped by. Evidently, they had a decent relationship with the pilgrims, because it wasn't uncommon for them to just stop in at a moment's notice without letting anybody know. They just would stop in and interact with the pilgrims and so forth. So maybe they just stopped in and joined them in their feast. They probably, let me say this. They may or may not have had turkey at the first Thanksgiving. Maybe, we don't know. There were wild turkeys in the New World, but there's some who wrote that they were very difficult to actually kill. So they must not have been as good of a hunter. They must not have been as good at hunting as Hans or somebody like that, right? Because they had a hard time killing these wild turkeys. Evidently, maybe they were more skittish back then. I don't know. But they, so they may not have eaten turkey. They probably ate, geese or other birds, maybe seafood like eels. I don't know. Who knows? Could be a lot of different things. But, we eat turkey, and that's fine. And we're going to keep on eating turkey, right? But yeah, they may or may not have actually had turkey at the first Thanksgiving. Did they play games? Again, we don't know. We just don't know. But there was definitely some kind of a day that they set aside to thank God for what he had done for them. And there's so much we can learn from that, right? There's just so much we can learn from that kind of way of viewing life, and that kind of way of trusting God for his provision. And even though they had gone through intense suffering and intense difficulty, they were still willing to acknowledge him, worship him, and thank him for getting them to where they were. There was so much death that first year for the pilgrims that they say there were actually only 4 women in the colony at the time of the first Thanksgiving. Can you imagine? 4 mothers, 4 wives. Everyone else was men or children. It must have been very hard. We need our moms, right? We need our wives. We need them to take care of us and cook for us and all of that. So many women, because the women were particularly susceptible to the diseases. So many of them had died. There was only 4 left. So it would have been a very difficult time. And a lot of hardship, and yet they were willing to thank God for his provision and for his care. Let's have that kind of attitude. Let's have that kind of posture. Do we do that? Do we thank God for what he's done, or are we more caught up in wishing our circumstances were different? let's be men and women, boys and girls who love God and thank Him every day, not just over Thanksgiving, for what He's done. So anyway, yeah, we've been through some challenging times. Everybody talks about 2020, such a terrible year, right? And they just can't say anything good about 2020. They just can't wait to get through it, get done, start a new year, and try again, right? But again, that's that attitude of just always wanting something better instead of thanking God for what we have. So think about that. Think about that today. Think about it tomorrow. Think about it all year. No matter what your circumstances are, no matter how hard it is, what do you have that you can thank God for every day? If I could tell you, but I don't think I'm going to do that, because I want you to think about it. I want you to think about those things that no matter how hard life is, no matter what challenges you face, you can always be thankful for those things. All right, guys, you have a great day today. Have a good time, play hard, have fun, be good sports. And tomorrow, remember the Pilgrims, remember the first Thanksgiving, remember the difficulties they went through, and learn from them, okay? They weren't perfect. There's things about the New World and the relationship between the Indians and the white people when they came over that aren't great. I know all that. But we can learn a lot from the Pilgrims, okay? They were people who were courageous. They were men and women who had conviction. They believed in something. They believed in it so hard that they were willing to risk everything. And they were people who were thankful to God for what He had done for them. You guys have a great day.